It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the fourth and final panel of the AI Uprising Hiwaraat conference. My name is Reham Primbiatova, and I'm a second-year student at Georgetown University, majoring in international economics. As someone who will be seeking employment soon, I will admit that this is a panel I'm very excited to hear from and learn from. As students, we're eager to identify the ways in which artificial intelligence is transforming labor markets and understand what the future of work may look like. While my peers and I may have some idea of what our first job may look like, we're curious and anxious to know what the job market may be in 10 years from now and the skill sets that it will require. For that, we seek the insights from the current leaders and experts in this field to help us understand recent trends and dynamics. Which brings me to you, our esteemed panelists. As economists, researchers, government, and the intergovernment officials who focus on labor markets, I'm excited to hear your insights on the current effects of AI and related technologies on labor markets. Where is the biggest shifts happening? Which sectors will benefit the most and will lose? Even if you cannot predict the future jobs that will emerge, can we still make some inferences? Help us learn what you see in your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Raigan, for the great introduction to this panel. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fourth panel of the AI Uprising Hiwaraat conference. My name is Alexis Antoniades. I am Professor, Director, and Chair of International Economics at Georgetown University in Qatar, and I actually do a lot of research on AI skills and the future of work. I'm excited to welcome our expert panelists and have a very lively discussion about the impact of AI on labor markets. We heard from the previous panel about the uses of AI and how it improves the quality of life. And I want to think about it from a consumer point of view. But when we think about people as workers in the production function, there are big changes taking place with technology. Changes that start in the 80s with skill bias technical change, but that have accelerated with the spread of AI. So I'm really excited about the panelists we have today because they don't just bring information from studies, but they work at the forefront, at the frontier of research, using very interesting data to understand and uncover the dynamic and the changes taking place in the labor market. So before we get into the topic, let me go around from you, Pawel, and ask you to quickly introduce yourselves.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pawel Gmyrek. I work in the ILO, so that's the International Labor Organization in Geneva. I'm in the research department where I'm a senior researcher, and I essentially work on topics related to technology and digital technology's impact on work as a broadly understood world of work. And of course, I'm one of those people who get asked a lot of questions when technologies like GPT are publicly announced, because then suddenly everyone wants to know what will happen to labor and how they will affect them. I'm in one of those units that produces studies, and we publish academic type of papers, which you can find on our AI observatory that we recently launched.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Salim Al-Barami. I'm the advisor of the Minister of Labor. I specialize in digital transformation and strategic planning. And I'm doing my academic research specifically on our research question is how can Qatar use AI to increase employability in the private sector? And that's what my focus is currently in Qatar, to try to analyze the skills and the skill gaps and hopefully the future of work.
Hi, everyone. I'm not sure if you can hear me. My name is Hoda Alkhzaimi. I'm a professor in NYU Abu Dhabi. I'm as well a governmental advisor for new economies and new sciences in the different diverse fields. I work with the World Economic Forum and co-chairing one of the Global Future Councils, focusing on emerging technologies, AI, and cybersecurity as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm my name is Chatzikonstantinou. I am an economist in Georgetown University, Qatar, where I teach a lot of macroeconomics. I'm very interested in topics of related to intangible investments, not necessarily artificial intelligence. And I really like to work a lot with big data. So I work a lot with like online job posts, vacancies, and then I work a lot with software installations across firms to track basically new digital adoption across countries and firms. And then part-time, I also really like to go into Hugging Face and look at like the number of parameters of all these new AI models. But more interestingly, to look at all these new data that are posted like daily. Like I really like to work with text data, so I really like to look at news, articles, and like online job vacancies. And, yeah. I hope we're gonna have a nice discussion.
So, so let's start this discussion by thinking about all the changes that AI bring in the labor market. And it creates new opportunities, as we heard throughout the day. It creates new jobs. It augments some of the jobs and the tasks, but it can lead to the loss of significant number of jobs. And what is interesting, what is important and probably unfortunate is that the places that stand to win the most from AI may not be the same as the places that stand to experience the highest number of losses. So in trying to understand that, let me start with you, Pawel, first. As the International Labour Organization, you spend a lot of your time or all your time trying to think how AI is going to affect labor markets. So why don't you start by giving us the ILO's global picture of AI in the labor market?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I spend a lot of time with my computer and data. And one of the ways to challenge someone who does this type of work is to take away their visuals and put them on stage without being able to show the statistics in the pictures. So I'm in that situation, and I'll try to tell you how we think about it and describe what we see in those statistics. So if you want to understand what a type of technology can do to a job, then first you have to figure out what do people do at work. And there are different frameworks to do that. Some people look at abilities that are needed for a certain occupation. Others look at tasks that I needed to complete a job. But if you want to build a global picture that goes away from the only very highly developed economies and it builds an overall picture of occupations, then you need some kind of a common denominator. And what we have been using to understand the impact of AI, and specifically generative AI, is the framework that we actually hold at the ILO, which is the International Standard Classification of Occupations. It's a global standard into which we basically fit reports from statistical offices of individuals responding to labor force surveys. So we get every year maybe 28,000 different occupations that are reported to us as titles of occupations. And our statisticians classify them into this hierarchical structure, which has 438 occupational groups, and it has standard descriptions of tasks. So if you want to compare what a primary school teacher does across different countries, you need some kind of a standard common denominator. And we've used these descriptions of tasks to rank tasks over 3,200 tasks for the start to understand how many of those tasks could be actually performed using generative AI as of today. So we focus on today's capacities. And from that, you get these very nice distributions. You get a matrix of data on which you can do statistics. You can link it to existing jobs. And we can count existing jobs and how many of them have tasks that could be theoretically performed with this technology. So when we aggregated globally, we came up with many more jobs that could benefit from augmentation, which means they have a range of tasks that could be performed faster or could be automated with generative AI, but they also have a wide range of tasks that still require a human. And there are many more such jobs globally than the jobs where you could perform basically all tasks in theory today with generative AI. And that's before we get into the question of technological accessibility to internet, to a computer that's fast enough, to the relative cost of labor, to that technology. But if we just count in theory what we could do today with this technology, we come up with some 5% of jobs that could be automated in high-income countries, and some 15% of jobs that could benefit from augmentation, and another up to 20%, which we didn't really know where to classify. We know they are exposed to this technology, they will interact with it, but they could go one way or the other, so towards augmentation, automation, depending on how the technology develops. For example, what kind of policies we have in place. I can break down those statistics a little bit more, but would you?
That's fine, yeah. Let's continue on that. I will turn to you, Salim, because you are also thinking about the same questions, yes, but for within the Ministry of Labor in Qatar.
Yes.
So maybe you can share some of your experience and your findings and how you actually leverage data and technology, because all the people sitting in the panel with me don't worry about losing their jobs, actually. They benefit from using the technology to augment the research they are doing. They wouldn't be able to talk about this work 10 years, you know, if they were here 10 years ago. So.
Well, what we wanted to do in the Ministry of Labor, first of all, we wanted to understand where do we stand compared to the international market. They come up with a certain standard, but that is based on the international standards. I want to know exactly where do we stand. So are we in the 5%? Are we in the 7%? So we decided to start it from scratch. The first thing that we did is we analyzed the market, tried to identify our skill gap assessment. Of course, we faced some issues with the data accuracy and all, but I believe our accuracy is in the range of 75 to 80%. We gathered all of the programs, university programs, we broke them down into skills. We gathered all of the supply from us because we are the Ministry of Labor. Anyone wants to hire, they need to come to us. So we know not the supply, the exact demand. And we included over that web scraped all of the job market advertisements that are in the market for Qatar. Based on that, we were able to identify the actual gap based on our own assessment. And now we are in the range of trying to identify the trends, trying to find where it goes, hopefully to reach the $1 million question, which is the future of work. Our problem is we don't know actually, and I don't think anyone knows what skills are important in 2 years from now. But we're trying to at least find the base on what could we tell anyone who's trying to enter the university today, what program should they take, and we should advise them in the universities that those are the skills that are in demand in the market to get a better productive graduates.
Thank you, Salim. I'll stay with this concept of work of the future, and I think which is behind me, and we can replace work with skills of the future.
Yeah.
Because 10 years ago, again, we used to think of degrees. Now nobody talks about degrees, it's about skills. We have companies that read the resumes from the bottom up, what skills people have, and we have companies that don't require to have a degree, and that changes things. And so I'll turn to Professor Chatzikonstantinou. You know, AI is one thing, but there are more skills on the block. And in trying to predict the future of work or the skills of the future, what do you see in your research? I know you've been analyzing 1.5 billion job vacancies because we do it together, so I know. What do you see currently? What are the big changes that are taking place?
Yeah, I mean, definitely that's like a very important question. The evolution of work is something that in economics is like a key question. But before I go into it, I just want to say, because we're talking about the AI bias, that our work is depending a lot on like access to big data from online job vacancies. Most of them are coming from, of course, the US, the UK, China. So we have that bias also when we study like the evolution of work and what are the important skills. So I want to go back to basically this question: what is the top skills of the future? I guess that is key to everybody, right? So I think like when I look at the past data, when you ask basically list the 10 top skills, you tend to see always the same top 10 skills. So if someone asks me what is definitely the top 10 skills of the future, I would probably list the same, which is communication skills, organizational skills, leadership, teamwork, soft skills that are going to be needed no matter what are the tasks that one has to basically deal with in the workday life. But then something interesting happens when you look at new skills and when you look at disappearing skills, right? So you can list skills based on what is posted online in 2010 and then compare it with skills that appear in 2022 or 2023, right? And you can do that by occupation, you can do that by city, you can do that by country, and what you see is like a striking pattern. I think it's not unexpected, like given that we're talking about AI, that a lot of those skills used to be, the disappearing skills used to be specific to occupations, right? So a lawyer would be needing to have a very good knowledge of WTO regulations. And more what is requested is digital intensive skills. So knowledge of big data and I don't think it's necessary that you will need to apply it as an occupation, but I think what is necessary is to be able to communicate with people that are experts in how to use AI systems, how to use these new tools, right? So I think this bottom line is, I think as another soft skill that should be probably listed there is adaptability to technology and being able to use technology is a very important skill. And I think this question that Alexis is asking about the evolution of work is particularly important, even when you think about economics, because in labor economics, we care about workers, and what is really important is to understand what leads to long spells of unemployment, and what has been recently been shown by many papers is that the people in the workforce that are really staying behind are people that are in occupations that are automated, but they have been trained in skills that are not transferable, right? They cannot move to a new occupation necessarily. They have to downskill, or they cannot even participate in the labor force. So I think there is a lot of need for policy there, retraining, and I hope to hear more about that too, in our discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. So Hoda, I will turn to you. I think it was Solo, the economist, who said, you see computers everywhere except in the productivity numbers in the era of computers. Now we have AI. We talk about skills. We talk about changes in the workforce and in the output. Maybe you can walk us through the impact of AI on productivity numbers and on global economies.
I mean, it's a great number. I mean, to start with asking on the effect of AI on employability, but the refocus around AI and economic development is quite important because it pushes to try to understand economic development from different lenses. We're normally evaluating that through GDP or GNU and all of these kind of different matrices, which is great. But as well, we're fitting into the global norms of, I think, echo chambers that are in the space. And AI is one of them. Like, out of sudden, AI is the global norm. And we should ask ourselves why. It's a great growth technology, but we also have to understand that it's also coming on top of stack of technologies. So what we have to focus on is the total factor of productivity as a massive indicator, because it encompasses different kind of productivity cycles analysis when we are evaluating economic development of a specific technology. It pushes to analyze employability related to a specific industry coming into the field, like AI or any of the new technologies that are coming into the field. But at the same time, we don't just analyze employability as a generic sector or as a generic norm. We try to understand what is the impact of high-skilled jobs into any kind of economic development within specific regions, talking about global south and global north, and what type of strategic efficiencies would it improve, would it introduce when we are talking about the productivity cycle across different economies, which is great. Because let's analyze what's happening through AI lenses. AI is a new technology coming to market. So it's disrupting jobs, adding to the erosion of jobs that are normally would be replaced in 5 to 10 years. And these are repetitive, routinic type of jobs. So the erosion cycle that happens on AI, on the employability cycle, it happens onto this superficial layer of 5 to 10 years kind of cycle. But it also pushes people to upskill their jobs and move from these kind of routinic jobs into a high-skilled employability market. And a high-skilled employability market is much more, I think, secured market. And I think my colleague here would agree with me for most of advanced economies, because you want your labor force to be at the that kind of premium cycle of being within the highly advanced economies. And within the highly advanced economies or highly advanced kind of skilled jobs, it would be hard to replace you. It would take maybe something around 20 to 30 years for you to be replaced. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Contradiev cycles of innovation. So he's an economist, came into the Conjuncture kind of institute, and he's trying to understand what are the economic cycles that are happening through different recession periods, economically through history. And he said that, okay, every few years we will have specific economic cycles that are triggered by recession. And at the end of the recession cycle, we will have innovational breakthroughs. And within those innovational breakthroughs, there is a bit of coupling in between slow market and fast market, and technological innovation, which is a contributing factor to TFP with employability, with the flow of capital, will allow you to exit any type of recession. So in his first analysis, he said that, okay, we will have 3 to 4 coupling breakthroughs together that would push us out of recession, and that was Team Power and something else. And then other economists came in later, analyzed his theory, and said that, okay, within the next cycle, we will have 10 different breakthroughs. Guess how many breakthroughs we're having in the current cycle? We're having more than 25 breakthroughs, more than 25 technological, scientific breakthroughs that are intertwining together to change the face of economies throughout the globe. But we are focusing only on AI because of the current economic cycle and because of the current echo chambers that exist globally. While we're only focusing on AI, there are new job markets in different different regions of the world and different emerging markets that are being created, over 200 technologies that are being created, and monopolies over the supply chains of these technologies are being constructed. So I think when we analyze our current competitive advantage of building the next employability cycle of AI, we should look deeper, not just at the superficial layer. Okay, these are the maybe the generative AI task force. No, we have to look in deeper towards what kind of hardware engineers that we are created to build the next task force for hardware AI engineers. What are the next task force for biosynthesis, for example, that we should be creating, because we are at that kind of tipping point of creating our own precision medicine because of this kind of intertwining, I would say, possibilities that exist in between AI and biosynthesis and other type of kind of industries. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm reading the questions as we have this interesting conversation, so I'll try to incorporate some of them into my next point. We know that technology, whether it's AI, and I think we talk about AI because since the introduction of ChatGPT, we understand now. We think we understand what it is. Before we wouldn't talk about it. But as you said, there are lots of technologies. One of the things they do, they automate many tasks, so we have to think about reskilling. So I want us to think about reskilling. I will come to Pawel and Salim. But also I want to understand what's the difference between the global south. As Emmanouil said, a lot of the data will come from advanced economies, but the impact is different if we look at the global south. I'll give you an example. I was in Manila visiting the Asian Development Bank last month, and one concern they have is that AI is gonna take out all the jobs in the service sector that Philippines exports, call centers, for example. Mohammed is the head of TMT in the previous panel. Last month, they invested in a startup that automates call centers that will wipe out jobs. These jobs will come from countries like the Philippines, not from the US. So it's technology and startups created in the Silicon Valley that will wipe out jobs in the global south. And I was talking to some VC fund managers visiting Doha. They invest in AI companies, and I said, what do you think about jobs? Is it going to augment jobs? And they said, no, the investments we make is in startups that will replace jobs. So we need to think of a few things. How is the global south different? I know it's a broad question, but I want to get some concise answers. And when we think about reskilling, and especially I want to know what the ILO thinks about it, and Salim, we have to think who is doing the reskilling, because if we think of the public sector and the government, they're behind the curve, whereas the companies are at the technological frontier. Or should it be done through a PPP type of structure? So let me stop here and turn to maybe Salim first to think about reskilling and the role of government, and then maybe Pawel, you can talk more about the global south and reskilling view of the ILO.
What you said is right. The government, the public sector is quite behind when it comes to identifying the skills needed for the market. And the private sector would know exactly what they need because they are acting in that market. What the Ministry of Labor did is they created committees for each industry, and they chose some of the leading companies in each sector. And those leading are categorized into large, medium, and small. And based on that, we started the dialogue with them. What do they need? What does the market need for them? What are the skills needed? And we also used graph knowledge. Since we already have the skills, we identified the skills that are in demand. We can evaluate between the person who is looking for the job and the job description. And we can identify, of course, the skills that are needed for that specific job. We calculate the time by evaluating how long does that skill requires after we did the evaluation from Coursera and all other online markets platforms to understand this skill will require, for instance, 6 months to be acquired. So we accumulate all of that, and we understand that this person, for him to be able to get that job, will require so and so time. And then we go into negotiation with those companies, and we enter like a partnership. We fund the training itself, and they commit to hire that person as they move forward.
Thank you. Maybe some words on the global south, Pawel?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. So that is something I worked on with the World Bank recently. But maybe let me start with this. Remember the two categories I mentioned to you, how we classify jobs, the augmentation potential and automation. When we look across income brackets of countries, so we group them according to the World Bank income status, when we look at this augmentation category, they are very similar percentages around the world, 13 to 15% of current employment, and they are very similar in terms of share of male and female employment. When we look at the automation jobs, those exposed to automation, we see a very clear trend. There are very few such jobs that are exposed to the risk of automation in the poorest countries, and the wealthier the countries, the more such jobs exist. And at each income bracket, we see 2.5 to 2.5 times more women in those jobs than men. Why is that? That has to do with labor market segmentation across genders. As countries become wealthier, women typically go to different types of jobs than men. Mm-hmm. And as they do that, and technologies like AI come in that gain cognitive capacities and can automate some sort of simple cognitive tasks, these tasks typically correspond to jobs like the jobs in customer service centers, call centers, or any type of clerical jobs. And normally there are many more women in this type of jobs. So we see this exposure, and then we said, the World Bank contacted me, and they said, well, but what about the poor countries? What about the global south, but what about the low-income countries? Will it be the same there? And we focused, we called the paper that you can find on this AI observatory I mentioned, we called it buffer or bottleneck. That was really our research question. So we said, okay, developing countries have a lower level of access to digital infrastructure. So will that be a buffer that will protect them from those negative results of automation? Or will that be more of a bottleneck to their productivity? And what we found is that the jobs that are exposed to automation in those countries, so in the global south, majority of them are already digitized. They use a computer and they have access to the internet at work. What we did is we basically analyzed almost 1 million individual responses from surveys in Latin America. And you can see based on that, the probability of someone using a computer at work. And most of those jobs that are exposed to automation have no buffer. They are exposed immediately to these effects. There will be exactly this type of jobs you mentioned in call centers and in different digitized sectors. The jobs that could benefit from this augmentation effect, meaning this additional productivity, up to half of them do not have access to a computer and internet at work. When we calculate all the jobs, for example, in Latin America, which hold countries from lower middle income to upper middle income country, so it serves us as a proxy for even poorer regions, we see up to half of these jobs that are in jobs that could benefit from productivity, they don't use a computer at work. So we are talking about a massive bottleneck to productivity. And that's before we even start talking about the skills and the transition. So, of course, that has implications for policy. And in the global south, these challenges are much bigger than in highly developed countries, because the question you ask, who pays for reskilling? How is that funded, but how is that organized? In high-income countries, we have higher budgets, institutions that are much better developed to handle this type of transition. They have typically social protection systems that can be used for that. And they have the means to conduct this type of studies we've been doing, but very much targeted what Salim was showing on the specific market, understanding which jobs are exposed, and then being able to use all those systems to manage the transition. In a developing country, this is a much bigger challenge. The institutions are weaker, the fiscal space is much smaller for the support. Typically, the social protection system is either inexistent in very low-income countries or very weak. And all of that will make it very difficult, also for companies that mostly operate in the informal sector, to access some kind of a similar type of transition. So one of the biggest risks we see is this increase in global inequalities, because high-income countries have all the conditions to take off with this additional productivity, whereas low-income countries are basically very much at the risk of being left completely outside of the scope of this technology. And maybe one last thing that we observe in there is that when you look at the income distribution, because we were asking ourselves, what will it do for the poor? There's a lot of expectation that these technologies can help the poor. But of course, poor don't use a computer and internet at work, and most of the tasks they perform have very little to do with those technologies. So when you plot the distribution of the income in those countries, you can see that jobs that will come into interaction as a first order effect with these technologies are jobs that are basically middle income jobs. So it's sort of a battle also for the middle class, because will it be the next wave of digital technologies that erodes the middle income and shrinks it? Or are we able to manage it in a way that allows for a more broad distribution of the benefits?
You talk about gender, and it's not difference just between rich countries and poor countries, but between male and female workers. And the previous panel talked about the importance of women in STEM degrees. And we care about that because there are many new jobs created in STEM. They have higher wages, higher wage growth, lower unemployment. With the transition to green economies, the IMF came up with an article 2 weeks ago that says a lot of jobs will be created, but if women are not part of that, they're not in STEM, they will not take advantage of that. And that's really unfortunate because it took decades to break down, not close, but bring down the wage gap between men and women. And think of a world down the road where we need a lot of people in STEM, but only men go into STEM. They only get the high-paying jobs. Then all the progress we made over the last 3 decades on the wage gap, it will go in the opposite direction again. So, Emmanouil, I will come to you. I know you do a lot of research on AI in companies, but for the sake of time, I will jump to the STEM education, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your work and finding on how does AI affect the demand for STEM education, and especially the gender gap?
Yeah, I think especially when you think about developed countries, thinking about these IT producing occupations and AI producing occupations is an important dimension, and especially also like thinking about these occupations that are complemented by AI, like high skill occupations that are complemented by AI, and how do workers select into those occupations. And I think there really the question to ask is how do students choose their major? And you know, when you think about the past 30, 40 years, I mean, we talk a lot about technological change, but probably in developed countries, the most transformative effect that we've seen in labor markets is through female labor force participation, right? And wage inequality dropping. And especially when you look at cohorts, and newer cohorts tend to enter in a more equal wage, in a more equal environment. One thing that hasn't really changed is what is called like the STEM gender gap, right? So there is this segregation, and when you think about certain occupation, you immediately think about a male occupation, or so when you think about engineers versus when you think about, say, biology, right? So I think that is key, and I think through what I've observed with my research, right? So what we're trying to do is analyze how students react to the labor market, right? Because we can see demand through online job posts, and then we can see how students react and what type of majors they tend to follow. And what do you see there is students do react to the AI revolution, and they tend to increase you know, the number of degrees in STEM fields, especially those that are IT producing fields, right? So computer science and engineering are probably the key ones there, tend to see a high increase in demand by students. But what is not really happening and what is not really changing is this segregation, this degree segregation hasn't really changed. But there are some, I guess, positive notes to take there, especially like coming from previous research. So I think what is really important, especially at that choice, what tends to be true is role models tend to alleviate a lot of this effect. So for example, we observe by looking, for example, at the professors, right? You can track professors these days by looking at research papers and text that is available online. And institutions that have more female professors represented, like especially in STEM fields, tend to have a smaller effect from AI. Of course, there is a lot of research there that discusses conditions even before entering the university, and like how do we understand these occupations? Is there like a bias into like a particular occupation coming from, you know, the family environment, coming from high school, from middle school, and we really need to rethink, I think, you know, how we think about occupations, right? When you think about the beginning of the IT revolution, a lot of the occupations that were using computers tended to be, of course, female-dominated and not necessarily male-dominated. Yeah.
Thank you. So let me summarize some of the findings. It's not just that AI is not affecting the gender gap, it makes it worse. It exacerbates the gender gap in STEM. And it does because it drives the demand for male-dominated degrees like engineering and computer science more than female-dominated STEM degrees like psychology and health sciences. So that's a negative impact on AI, on STEM education, on the gender gap. But I think there's a positive side to it. We heard the keynote speaker talk about dancing and building robots. And there's always a barrier for women to enter that field because, let's say, coding is a barrier. But with AI, you break that barrier. You don't need to know coding. You just need to know what to ask and where to ask, and you can break that barrier. I have a friend, he has a very big gaming company. And I told him all the developers that create these games are all men, or 90% of them are men because they have the technical background. But they bring the mindset of men, and they don't bring the creativity of women in the development process because there was this barrier. But now you don't care about that barrier because you can use AI to create the code. So you can have mixed teams that complement each other. And I think we need to better understand how that barrier is breaking. So maybe, Hoda, if I turn to you, you are female, you are into AI. As a woman, where do you see the barriers? And have you seen a shift that over time it makes it easier for women to pursue more what we would consider technical jobs, but maybe by bringing their creativity, or you think it's getting more difficult?
That's a very challenging question to address. I would say that we should be very attentive to the data points that are coming from Global South and allow those data points to speak as well. I think within STEM kind of adaptation and development in Global South, and these are research studies that we have structured at mass within women in AI communities, women in STEM communities, women in science communities, we see like 70 to 65% of women in STEM field. They're leading the field in Global South. They're as well leading big tech companies, the coding initiatives. We have established over 50 coding initiatives across the Arab world. And most of the women leading these boot camps for kids and for adults are coming from diverse STEM field. We have established with the UNICEF a program that was the UAE government got awarded for. The General Women Union in UAE got awarded for an award with the UNICEF, a robotics boot camp and a coding boot camp that went through all kind of primary schooling program prior to the Ministry of Education adopting that program as a de facto program in all schools in 2015, 2014. And most of the participants on leading these boot camps were women from across sectors. So I think our data points are a bit different than the Northern data points, Global North, and we should acknowledge this. This is a strong point that we have and we should capitalize on. I was in a university, I started at a university in UAE, and then I got my master's degree in France, and then my PhD, and I worked for 12 years in Europe and in Singapore and Japan. And then, so I was a majority in the Global South. I was part of the 70% part of those kind of cohort representation. When I went to France, I was part of the 12%, and I was like, where are the women? What's happening? I thought that we are in developed economies. And then when I went to Denmark, I was part of the 1% doing crypto and cryptanalysis in my research. So I think this skewed cycle here is not about resources. Definitely Global North, they have structured resources. Maybe it's about making sure that there is equitable access to those resources across boards is very important, especially for girls and for women, not just in the pipeline, as my colleague here just highlighted, as the early pipeline, but also in the board levels. We have board level participation programs right now in UAE, for example, that we're super proud of, where we have finally got the exchange market in UAE to make sure that 30% of the board listed companies, like all listed companies in UAE, will be having 30% women on board. And they started by at least making sure that there is 1% of women on board in that. And this is something that does not exist in the Global South, North. We're talking about 30% of the cabinet being women. We're talking about 50% of the Federal National Council being women. So these are as well things that we don't see on a global North. We're talking about as well equitable rights and earning for women. Like we have a law when it comes to policy that says that it's illegal to have disparity in wages in between women and men in government jobs and in private sector jobs. So having the whole ecosystem supporting the positioning of equal existence of women, not just in STEM, but across board, I think is gonna be very empowering and making sure that they don't fit into what you saw in statistics and being cashiers and being at the blue-collar kind of jobs structures. Because unfortunately, in those economies, we're pushing women to be at the informal job markets. And we should be very mindful to how we uplift women out of the informal job markets and make sure that whatever technology we're building, and by the way, we have one of the highest adaptation to emerging technologies on global South markets. 58 to 59% of AI adaptation is happening here. It's not in the US, it's not in Europe. The highest number of chief AI officers are happening in this region, in the global South. The highest also, I would say, indigenous adaptation to AI to preserve languages, values, and indigenous practices are happening here in the global South region. And I see that a high testimony to innovation for impact and technology for impact, rather than just building a technology for a profit that at the end of the cycle would kill the society and would kill the benefit of the collectives or the benefit of the people. So I think we have a massive learning scale, I would say, scenarios and use cases that we have to acknowledge within the global South. And I think the mass of the data points that you have at the moment in global North is coming from global South, actually. The only reason that they are in global North is because of the development, companies residing in a global North and the cloud structures that are running and analyzing AI or whatever kind of cycle residing in a global North. A colleague of mine sent me an article saying that one of the customer call companies in India were going to, the customer call representatives were training the AI in one of the San Francisco companies to overtake their jobs in the future. And to me, this was a scale of a massive kind of alerts and conversation of building a new forms of slavery structures that we are pushing people to do, and we need to be mindful of equitable opportunity access in the future, not just for women, but also for anybody who's at the blue-collar structure in any markets, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad you made that point, because even here in Qatar, we have to acknowledge the contribution of Her Highness Sheikh Hamza for setting Qatar Foundation, getting Georgetown here because of her leadership and the leadership of His Highness Sheikh Hamad. And indeed, if you look at even in Iran, there are more women studying math compared to men than if you look at the US. Same thing in Turkey. So there are important differences that are both negative if we look at some skills, but also positive, and we need to build on the positive ones. So we don't have much time, so I want to take some of the questions. I can summarize them into two, and I'll go around and get your very quick reflection. So the first one is basically on the observation that not just us, but the whole day we are talking about jobs created and some jobs are gone. So basically, overall, do you think we'll be better off? There will be more jobs created and labor markets will be better off, or are you a bit concerned? I know no time to elaborate, but what's your own personal view? Emmanouil, let's start with you.
Yeah, I want to bring a different perspective a little bit here because I think it's important. So with a lot of those IT and intangible investments, they require a lot of fixed costs. And so you tend to see like the biggest firms and the multinationals adopting them. And I think, it might be a great thing if you're a consumer, but it's not a great thing if you're a worker because it drives a lot of this, monopsony power that we have observed in the past 20 years. So I think what is key a little bit in the discussion and needs to be, key of the policy discussion is how do we, deal with monopsony power, especially as firms are going to start adopting these technologies, other than thinking about replacement and,
I think one of the major points is making sure that we have hubs for research and development, and mostly science development in the global South regions. This is quite important to establish an equitable access to building the technology. We don't want to live in a world where a specific part of the world is a developer of a new technology while the other is just like an adapter to the technology, because that's not how the new power of the world should be established.
I think to reap the benefit of AI, we need to address a few factors. First of all, it requires, as I said, a sophisticated infrastructure, and it's expensive. It's not cheap.
Yeah.
We also need to have the right framework, the right policies, and I think the most critical element is trust. If the person doesn't trust the technology, no matter how sophisticated it is, no matter how user-friendly it is, they will not adopt it.
Yeah.
So I think, answering your question, I would say it depends. How do we manage those risks and barriers?
I couldn't agree more. So historically, more technology means more jobs. Also means higher paying jobs, and but also a bigger turnover. So technology also means some people losing jobs. And that's where I really agree with Salim. It's about how that is managed through policies and systems. And for that, we need to study the phenomenon. We have to understand where the impact is going, which is what we've been trying to do through our research, and create incentives for added value. Like, I find that it's a bit sad that we often think these days about technology like AI as a first thing as the automating capacity of it. Because it's the value added and incentives for creating that additional set of services and additional set of capacities for humans that we should be thinking about. If we think about previous waves of technologies that were transformative, they were not just automating something for humans. A computer didn't just automate a typewriter. It just gave us so much more. A plane gave people ability to fly, not just automated some kind of ability of moving about. So when we think about this kind of technologies, we should always think, how is that managed in a way that new things come out of it, rather than just this very narrow focus of automation. And currently, the incentives are still set because also maybe of this chase for data and learning from the human's digital footprint. The incentives go very much to learning from what humans do, and that results in automation of what humans do. But I think we need to think in policies much more about incentives for this new set of tasks and new set of abilities for humans through learning, through training of those machines. And the second part that we haven't discussed at all, and I think is extremely important, is the impact of those technologies on the quality of work. That's, again, something we choose, how we use them. If you come to work every day and you have your boss look at your hands all the time and supervise how fast you perform every task, that's not called good management, that's harassment. You can do that today with algorithms very well. You can monitor people's emails, you can monitor the tone of the communication, speed of the responses, and so on. That is digital harassment. That's not great use of technology for better management. And we should think of where we set the limits for this technology and where we don't agree to use it, even though we could. We can drive a car at 300 per hour outside of here. We collectively agreed it's not a good idea to do it. We can agree to the same thing with those technologies and say what we don't want to do with it, and also consider who are the people who produce this technology for us. That was mentioned earlier in the context of content moderation, but these are armies of people training or labeling data that can be used for training of these technologies. And I think they should be part of that consideration of how we think of policy frameworks, where we get the data, just like we think who produced the apparel that we put on and the supply chains behind them. Today, that has become a norm, and I think it should become a norm for this technology.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. So we have two questions that are related, and somehow one answers the other one. And it's about aging population. So let us think, we know we have a big problem with aging population in many countries. It used to be just Japan, but it's Korea, it's Greece, US, everywhere. So let's try to think the role of AI in a declining population. is AI going to drive economic growth? That's one part of the question as population is declining, because what brought part of the growth was rising population. And the second, as we tend to live more years, will you be able to be productive after we are 60 years old because we have access to AI? So who wants to take that first?
I mean, I think I'll take that first. Thank you so much, Alexis. Great question, hard to answer. Longevity, I think, and AI and productivity is such a great question to have on the table. But I think it comes as well with the maturity of the compound technology. I don't want to just think of it as an only AI kind of a question. Because in order to address this growth of population aging process that's happening at the moment across different nations, we need to understand what are we doing to support, and maybe this is the silver lining in the whole situation. Because I think internationally we're thinking today can we, for example, improve productivity cycle of people who are aging above 50 years old to 70 years old. And that productivity cycle is not supposed to be about their alignment to a job description, but more of the well-being structures that is being structured around them, for them maybe to be entrepreneurs injected back into the productive kind of economy without enforcing specific traditional kind of employability kind of aspects on those sector of people. And what we're seeing today is a massive kind of interest from the people who are above 60 to get back to school, to understand what's AI exactly, get themselves very well versed around AI education, about coding, about building their own platforms and their own solutions. But are we doing it fast enough? I don't think so. I think we need to really endorse and develop and invest in new ventures that are focusing on the silver economy, we call it, the economy that is being supported and supporting people who are above specific age group, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it links to that previous discussion we had on STEM, because very often we think, how do we focus on more people going to STEM education, and this is where we see high-income jobs. But that's just where we see high-income jobs today, because partially through policies or lack of them, very often we choose to have high-income jobs in those sectors. But there are many sectors, especially in aging populations, where there's a huge demand for care economy, for health-related occupations. Majority of the regions are starting to age or are deeply into the curve already. And we will see just higher demand for people who look after our grandparents, parents, and us eventually. And for the moment, we don't value these jobs in the same way. In economic terms, they're not equally rewarded as the STEM jobs, where we hope, but not everyone will be doing STEM. And when we look at the distribution in economies, most of the people are not in tech jobs. Most of the people have very little to do with coding and skills like that, but many people are in jobs which we could value much more in how we manage redistribution in economies. And the same goes for green jobs. If we want to be serious about the green transition that we were discussing earlier today, and with which the first keynote started, it has to do a lot with how we value jobs in that sector, how we create incentives for that. And what some of the latest studies show us is that AI is starting to compete for skills with the green sector. So creating incentives to not have AI now pull away people from the green jobs is also an important part of the way these incentives are set in the economies.
Thank you.
We don't have this issue mainly in the region. Our problem is actually the opposite. We have a huge number of youth that we need to find solutions for them. But what we also did, and we identified that there are some retirees who are getting older, but they still want to be back to work. So we created a platform specifically for them. trying to find positions that are less demanding. They could have the skills that they acquired along the years, but with less effort that they can also contribute. But in general, the issue of aging community, it doesn't exist here.
Yeah, I think also like one important consideration, I think like when you think about an aging workforce is like understanding a little bit what drives career trajectories. And I want to go back a little bit to that discussion about the gender gap. So I mean, what you tend to see is, of course, younger workers tend to enter in more equal terms, but then there is a divergence, and I hope that AI maybe it's going to help about career trajectories there. Like there's a divergence because there's a selection into occupations based on hours worked, I guess because of family planning reasons most of the time, but also because of bias, I guess, into like hiring. So my hope, I guess, on a positive note is maybe AI is going to allow us to have more flexibility, is going to allow us to have, you know, more equal, you know, opportunities in terms of hours work, in terms of the quality of job, but also in terms of, you know, promotions. So, yeah.
I think more of like a high-skilled income meeting informal economy, and that's what we should have at the moment, because at the moment informal economy is low paid, right? But maybe AI with these kind of reformed policies around remote working and everything else is going to flip the coin for us, and then it would be like a high-income, high-skilled kind of a space.
Yeah. And I would think it's not surprising in a few years down the road, we see that we work fewer days, there is more quality in the work, and maybe there is basic income for everybody in society. But unfortunately, we ran out of time. I want to thank you again for all your wisdom and your thoughts on this, and the audience for staying with us for the last panel.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you all. I think I have a very difficult task now, and it's to have some closing remarks after the fantastic conversations that we have had. I will do my best. I have to be honest. I thought about letting AI do it, but then I said, I'm not going to take my job away from myself. So, yes, I'm going to give you now what I tried, and I hope that for now is better than AI. It has been almost a year since I started drafting a concept note for this conference with some of my colleagues who are around. And you know, as a professor of economics with a strong interest in the impact of technologies in labor markets, I knew that I wanted to have a conversation about the effect of artificial intelligence in the future of work. I mean, of course, that's why we had this panel, right? You would imagine. But, you know, as our discussions continue, and thanks to the perspective of my colleagues from other disciplines, I found this extremely narrow. I soon found myself intrigued, fascinated, and to some extent uneasy about the effect of artificial intelligence about many other aspects of our lives. Finally, we decided to focus on how AI intersects with two other dominant issues in international affairs, the future of work and environmental sustainability. I know that at a first glance, this might not seem logical, as Alessio clearly pointed out earlier today, but for us, it was a very logical choice, because from our own process of putting together a concept note, we realized that it is imperative to have a multidisciplinary conversations about the effect of artificial intelligence in our world. And during this conference today, we have aimed to approach the intersection between these issues from a distinct perspective, from our unique identity and values as a Jesuit university that provides liberal arts education in Qatar. Throughout this conference, it has not been our goal to simply discuss the technology itself, how it might evolve, how to integrate it in our life, or how we can make money out of it, which, I mean, of course, I'm interested in, and I guess all of you are. All these are, of course, interesting and relevant questions that are being extensively discussed. But instead, we have strived to go beyond. We wanted to bring new and diverse voices to the table. We have focused our conversations on how AI is changing our life and how AI can contribute to a meaningful life. The fantastic group of speakers that have been on this stage are a clear testament to the multidisciplinary and diversity that we aim for. We have heard from anthropologists, economists, engineers, entrepreneurs, historians, lawyers, philosophers, policy experts, and public officials. The topics that we have addressed are a testament to our focus on the impact of our lives. Throughout the day, we have discussed the ethics of AI, its potential to improve humanity, enhance sustainability, and aid us in designing economies that benefit all workers. Having these conversations in Qatar is particularly pertinent and timely in the region because all the countries are moving fast to seize the opportunities that artificial intelligence brings. The region is developing public and private institutions to regulate and promote its adoption, carrying out local investment as well as investing in AI around the world throughout their sovereign wealth funds. This will surely help them diversify their economies, which is one of their main goals that they have, and improve the well-being of their population. But at the same time, Qatar has the historic opportunity to develop and carefully select investment opportunities that ensure just transitions toward environmental sustainability, implement ethical applications of artificial intelligence, and promote workers' dignity. We hope that the conversations that we have had today serve as a starting point in this process, and we are looking forward to further contribute to this in the future as an academic institution. I would like to thank Dean Safwan Masri, whose leadership and vision have inspired this timely and thought-provoking dialogue on how AI intersects with the future of work and environmental sustainability. I am here closing this exciting conference thanks to the countless hours of work of a fantastic organizing team, Mahmoud Adam, Raha Hakim Dabar, Andrew Henley, Robert Laws, James Olsen, and Farouk Sisan. Thank you very much. I thank also the countless I also want to thank the countless contributions that my colleagues at Georgetown University in Qatar have made to the program of the conference and the tireless support of the staff from the Office of the Dean, events, and all the departments from our university. In particular, I would like to thank Joy Atrash, who has gone above and beyond to make sure that everything runs smoothly today, and I would like an applause if you... Thank you, Joy. I would also like to thank all the volunteers, students, our partners in Carnegie Mellon University in Qatar and Strategy Hub, and the staff at Ward of Astoria in West Bay for all your help and everything that you have done today for us. Finally, today and for months. Finally, I would like to thank all of you, the attendees, that have made this conference a success. At Georgetown University in Qatar, we see this Hiwaraat conference as the first step, only as the kickoff for more thought-provoking discussions about artificial intelligence and the opportunities and challenges that this technology poses to improve humankind. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. And now we invite you for a reception. Thank you.